Yes, good afternoon. I hope you have energy to follow coming 1.5 hours to jointly to reflect about regional cooperation. We will do tandem presentation with Joachim, and so I'm glad that he is standing next to me. As it was introduced, I'm working for Baltic Environmental Forum, but today I'm talking on behalf of VASAB, which conducted a study about aiming to evaluate and to assess how regional cooperation has been working in the Baltic Sea region, because this framework has been established almost 10 years ago, and slowly the framework has been enriched by different elements like guidelines, like roadmap. But the key instrument and the key aim for regional cooperation is to achieve coherent maritime spatial plans across the borders in the Baltic Sea region, which should be also based on ecosystem approach, and this should be achieved by 2020. So quite ambitious goals to be achieved in coming years. And in my speech, I will reflect more about different support tools which has been used to achieve this. And one of the key drivers or key instrument to achieve this is HELCOM VASAB, Maritime Spatial Planning Work Group, firstly established already in 2010, but through years it has been working actively and implementing its work plans to support achieving coherent MSP in the Baltic Sea region. And now I would like to hand over the word to Joachim, who would, as a co-chair of the HELCOM VASAB MSP work group, would tell more about platforms and details of cooperation.
Yes, and we will come back to this framework later when Christina will talk about the assessment that she and others have done on the framework. Well, we have this framework, but there are also other platforms for cooperation, of course. Well, the HELCOM VASAB MSP working group, of course, is in the center of this framework. And attached to that, there is also a data expert group. But also there are other kinds of meetings taking place in the region. For example, there has been a number of consultation meetings where countries meet and consult each other on each other's plans. And of course, as we had so many plans being prepared, and we are 9 countries, there's been a lot of those meetings. So you can say we see each other quite often in different contexts, but focus on MSP from different aspects. And of course, also we have this official ESPO consultation that we have to consult each other when it comes to strategic environmental assessment. And then, of course, we have our projects, and I talked about that yesterday. We have had a lot of projects in the Baltic Sea, and the most important ones the last 2 years has been the Pan-Baltic Scope. It's ending by this conference. And there will be a new project coming, or it has started already. It's Capacity for MSP. It has its kickoff meeting tomorrow. Then there have been another range of projects, but more thematic projects linked to MSP, like Baltic Lines, Sea Geese, Baltic Rim, dealing with culture and so on. Well, governance structures are always complex, and they are always different, and you have all these acronyms to deal with. But in the Baltic Sea, we have HELCOM, which of course is based on the Regional Seas Convention. It's the Baltic Marine Environment Protection Commission, established very early in 1974. It's focusing on environmental policy. And then we have the other one, which maybe is not so common around the world, is VASAB, Visions and Strategies Around the Baltic Sea, dealing with planning, physical planning, territorial development. And that was established, you can say, after the end of the Cold War. So it's a little bit newer. And so we have 2 strong regional organizations that can deal with MSP. And going to this working group, I think it has been mentioned many times in this conference. Well, what functions does it have? Well, it's a forum for transboundary cross-sector dialogue, enabling approaches in MSP in the region. Is also assisting the partners in implementation of something called the Baltic Sea Action Plan, which is an action plan to deal with environmental challenges. It's also assisting in implementation of something called the long-term perspective for the territorial development of the Baltic Sea region. That's a long one. And that's we can say the vision of VASAB. And then, of course, also this working group, as well as HELCOM as VASAB as organizations, are also providing the Baltic Sea region perspectives in international processes, including the EU. And also the European Commission is also attending these meetings from time to time, but they are partners as well. Well, here are some highlights from the work program for the last 2 years. Well, exchange of experience and good practices, that's for every meeting, of course. Then we work with data. It's about creation and sharing MSP data, and that's why we have this data expert group. And then we also investigation of the possible regional development of special concepts that we need in MSP, like the green infrastructure concept or the blue corridors, as one example. And that's quite concrete. That's about developing a support tool for MSP. And then also we have in our work program to come up with proposals and means and tools to support coherent application of MSP, including land-sea interaction. That's another topic. And then, of course, we had this follow-up of guidelines. We wanted to follow up the guidelines, and that Christina will talk about later, about that. Well, that was the HELCOM VASAB working group. Then we have this project, Pan-Baltic Scope. It's a collaboration between planning agencies, regional organizations, and one research institute. It's a very hands-on project. It's about actually supporting the elaboration of concrete plans, real plans. And in that sense, it's supporting the roadmap towards MSP. It's also supporting the EU directive, directly, you can say. It's about sharing best practices and building new knowledge. It's about developing tools, approaches, and planning evidence at Pan-Baltic level. Like this green infrastructure that was part of the work plan of the HELCOM VASAB group. And we also established something we call a planning forum, which is a central forum for collaboration. And you can say that the Pan-Baltic Scope project has been used also to fulfill the work plan of the HELCOM VASAB group. It has been a means of doing that. And that's why all the results we have from the Pan-Baltic Scope project, like the concept of green infrastructure or maps on fish habitats or other studies or reports, are always presented in the working group and discussed. And there's always a discussion how to take it further. Or maybe sometimes if something should not be taken further. Because the HELCOM VASAB group is a very formal group, and countries and partners are there on instruction from the governments. Whereas the Pan-Baltic Scope is a free-thinking project. So there is a difference. Well, this planning forum. Well, we thought that we needed to have a place to actually discuss planning issues, and this HELCOM VASAB working group, as it is now, is not the right form for that. We need to have a kind of separate group where planners meet and discuss what they need to discuss. It could be transboundary issues, it could be offshore wind in border areas, or how to deal with shipping, and to learn from each other, and also to meet other planners dealing with the same type of problems. Because now we are not only elaborating plans, we're also developing systems and methods how to do planning at the same time. And then you need to have someone to speak to and someone to get some feedback from. So we also use this group for discussing that kind of things. How to deal with digital plans, how can we do that, and so on. And also, one task of this group was to check that the other work with the Pan-Baltic Scope was in line with the planning needs, because we wanted to keep the whole project towards planning and planning needs. And finally, some reflections before we will hear more about the assessment. I would say that relevance is very important if you want to have people coming to the meetings, if you want to have resources and time spent. So there must be something in it for everyone. That's very important. And when it comes to transboundary cooperation. And you have to think that you have to see it as, if you have a planning forum or a working group like VASAB, it's something that adds to your process, that supports your process. Then it will be used, and then it will be useful. And the next one is, it's like all cooperation is about sharing and listening. And if you don't share, you will not be given anything. So it's about sharing and listening. That's very important in these meetings. And then I have my other points that I presented yesterday, but you heard them already, so I skipped them this time. But you can see them. So I give the word to Christina.
Yes, so we have a very nice and fruitful cooperation among the countries of the Baltic Sea, but it's also time once upon in few years to reflect how well we are in cooperation, how sufficient are we in implementation of different tools which has been created as a support to member states. And at the end of the last year, VASAB commissioned a study to evaluate and to assess how countries are implementing different key elements of so-called common regional MSP framework, which is maritime spatial planning principles, roadmap, as well as the guidelines. Meanwhile, VASAB and HELCOM jointly have adopted 3 guidelines. One is the guidelines on transboundary cooperation, one is guidelines on output data, sharing of output data on maritime spatial planning, and another one is on ecosystem-based approach. So the guidelines were adopted rather recently, in June 2016, but still we have already the first practices how to implement and uptake these guidelines. So the task was to a little bit to evaluate how successful are countries with implementing these key elements. And one of them is related to maritime spatial planning principles, which were adopted actually before EU Maritime Spatial Planning Directive was adopted. And that's why they were broad-scale, cross-sectoral, based on ecosystem approach. And the aim for adopting these principles was to ensure coherence between different maritime spatial plans and planning systems in the Baltic Sea region. So 10 principles, like sustainable management, ecosystem approach, long-term perspective and objectives, precautionary principle, participation and transparency, high-quality data on information, transboundary coordination and consultation, coherence between terrestrial and maritime spatial planning, planning adapted to characteristics and spatial conditions of different sea areas, and 10th, but not least, continuous planning. So during this year, we tried to reflect how successful have we been in implementing these principles, and do we need to change or adjust these principles? Because 9 years have been passed since adoption of these principles. And we can see that for 6 out of 10 principles, there would need some slight modification. In general, countries were satisfied with these principles, but time has passed and we have a new knowledge and might be new look at these principles, and that's some modification would be needed in coming years. With regard to guidelines on transboundary consultation and public participation, this principle is outstanding in HELCOM VASAB circle. It is also part of ecosystem-based approach in Malawi principles, and it's a special article in EU MSP directive. To implement that, the guidelines were adopted in 2016, and they cover both sides, so public participation as well as transboundary cooperation at pan-Baltic level. And one of the key steps to implement this principle and these guidelines are establishing formal process of transboundary information exchange and consultation at early stage of MSP. So this might be coming also from so-called Aarhus Convention, which asks public to be involved at early stage to those planning processes which concerns environmental matters. And of course, maritime spatial planning is very strongly linked to this, to marine environment. What does it mean in practical terms? It means also to really have an active communication with your neighboring countries, to send information, to inform country, to also tell in advance what is the intention of this, your maritime spatial plan. How are we successful with implementing this task? Not always the case that we inform countries in advance. It might be also related to the conditions that these are the first maritime spatial plans developed in the region, and we are, as a competent authorities, very often uncertain. Is it the right moment when we can inform countries? Should we have enough data? Are we ourselves clear about the intention of our plan? What is the scope of our plans? So that's why a majority of countries have been informing countries when stocktaking have been presented, information have been compiled, and we have enough evidence and knowledge in which direction maritime spatial plan will be worked on. It also is related, the timing is very different in our region. So here is a scheme which reflects that the first plans which were developed before adopting of directive actually used ESPO convention mechanism to inform countries about the draft plans. So these were already in rather late stage of informing neighboring countries, and that's very difficult then to actively be involved when the more or less strategies and objectives have been designed. So you can mainly reflect on certain elements. Now with the adoption and work on the new plans, the process is slightly different. So many countries try and have informed already at the early stage of the development of the plans. So what are the main challenges and proposals for improvement? And that might be also taken into account when we develop these proposals for international guidance on transboundary cooperation. So to find the right balance between meetings. It was already commented by Joachim that meetings need to be well prepared and structured. There is a need to have formal meetings and formal structures for country cooperation, but a lot can be achieved also in formal meetings and then later presented and adopted in, officially. Without official approval, it will also not work, but yes, the process could go faster if we support with informal meetings. Second important factor is transparency of the process as such, and it could be strengthened in future. We have heard also from different stakeholders that not everyone knows where to find information, what is the actual stage of development of maritime spatial plans in own countries or neighboring countries. And that's why it is recommended to develop kind of a public and transboundary consultation strategy, which would outline all steps, what will be taken in the coming years, how consultations will be organized. So also Baltic Sea region stands in front of what's the next. It's not only internationally, but also for us. We know that our roadmap is completed in 2020, which is already next year in a couple of months. So what's the goal afterwards? We know that majority of plans will be also adopted by 2021. So should we look at the new guidelines? Should we revise guidelines? Shall the new roadmap focus on how to support practical implementation or enforcement of maritime spatial plans? Because as our experts and countries are saying, maritime spatial planning is a process and cyclic process. So with adoption of the plans and sending notification to European Commission, the life is not over. So we will need to continue. And there will be some new challenges ahead of us. Thank you.
Let's give a round of applause first. Thank you. Please don't disappear, because there was already a few questions from Screenio, and let me just highlight them to be a bit larger there. But there was 3 questions. One was that does a common and shared vision for MSP at the sea basin level foster the cross-border cooperation? And then the other one was that there was very positive view that you gave, but is there any conflicts that you could report in transboundary governance and how they were addressed? And we will touch this upon the workshop. And the third one was that, was there any coordination in the MSP in terms of timing the procedures across countries? For example, Christine, you showed the arrow there, and you can see that they are very different phases, but has there been any coordination? So you are free to pick anyone or all of them if you have any reflections on those.
Add to what I'm saying. Well, start with the timelines and the planning of when you have your meetings and I mean, each country has its own process and has started at different points in time. So in that sense, it's not coordinated time-wise. But of course, we are coordinating our meetings very well. When it comes to project meetings, we have a group. We try to arrange as many back-to-back meetings as possible. So we had consultation meetings when you had group meetings and so on to make it more efficient. So, and then when it comes to shared vision, there is no specific MSP vision for the Baltic Sea. I know that was one recommendation from an MSP project once upon a time, but so far we don't have that vision. But on the other hand, we have there are a number of visions around that really links to MSP, and one, of course, for the EU countries is the European strategy for the Baltic Sea region, where they have a vision about saving the sea, increasing prosperity, and connecting the region. And all that, of course, links to the MSP. So there are visions, but there is no specific MSP vision, I would say. And then conflicts. I cannot recall any. No, I cannot recall any conflicts, actually.
Well, you're Swede.
Yeah. No, not conflict. No. I don't. I cannot recall.
Well,
not from the Swedish perspective, anyway. I cannot recall any.
And this is something that we are going to dig a bit deeper later on, because we are asking, has there been any experiences of this kind? But that's good to know that not any. Christine, do you have anything to add?
Well, I would also say there is no conflicts, transboundary conflicts. That means that there are no internal conflicting situation between stakeholders in a country. But there are concerns about different aspects between countries, and these are then dealt in transboundary consultations about, and these are mainly related to impacts to environment, like using more offshore, what will be cumulative effect on environment, or are shipping lines or areas reserved for shipping, are they coherent across countries? I would say these are more concerns of coherence of the planning documents and not the conflicts.
Okay. And of course, there is opportunity to ask questions live also, not just there, if there is any. There is one hand, so just take the microphone because it's easier to hear from everyone. So, Coffee, you were on stage yesterday, but here's the microphone.
I think one of the challenges that has been raised is the fact that you said we are having a lot of formal meetings to discuss, but then there hasn't been a lot of outcomes. So my question is, how do we move from having these meetings to having more outcome-based, output-based kind of transboundary approaches, or even if you're talking about coordination and coherency? Is it just because maybe we've not defined what our real outcomes are, although we have the visions, we have the principles, we have all the guidelines? Is this just because at the sea basin level, we've not really discussed what specific outcomes we really want to have?
They're fighting over which one?
No, I was thinking some examples, but I mean, there are outcomes actually, but it's it's a sequence. It's like, for example, green infrastructure is one example. It's infrastructure is about planning evidence. It's about having planning evidence so you can handle nature in your planning. And green infrastructure is a concept that you can use for that. And that was raised in the Helcom VASAB working group quite early on. And then it was taken up by this Baltic Sea project, that they developed the concept further. And now this concept is also discussed within other parts of Helcom, because Helcom is the environmental body for Baltic Sea region, you can say. So you can see that this issue has moved from very early discussion by the support of projects and into the more formal Helcom work. Because Helcom is, like all the other intergovernmental organizations, is run by countries, meaning ministries. So whatever is done at the low level at some point will reach the higher level, and in that sense you can say we have outcomes.
Good, thanks. And then we'll just pick the last question or comment. There was the question of, can bilateral discussions, which are focusing on more important issues, be more efficient than using the whole Baltic Sea region? Have you experienced on this one?
Yes, we have experienced. Yes, we have experienced. Actually, we have had that kind of discussions as well, and also inside this, within these projects, we've had bilateral meetings as part of the projects, and that's quite often the case, that you have to talk to one or two countries, and in some cases you have to talk to everyone, but so that has happened at several occasions. Yes.
Thank you very much. Another round of applause for our first presentations. And now it's time for Tselka's presentation. And let me just switch this one for you. There you go. Floor is yours.
Nothing's happening. Okay,
no.
Fine. Thank you. First of all, to clarify all these abbreviations, so PAPRAC stands for a Regional Center of the Mediterranean Action Plan of the UN Environment Programme. Legal basis for Mediterranean Action Plan is the Barcelona Convention for the Protection of the Mediterranean Sea and Coasts, and the PAPRAC, the specific center based in Croatia, in Split, is in charge of the implementation of the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Protocol for the Mediterranean region. Now, who says Mediterranean says a semi-closed, in parts very narrow sea basin, shared by 21 different countries, different in terms of geological features, political situations, economic situations, religions, cultural traditions, and many other things. And if it comes to the Barcelona Convention system, which is the Regional Sea Convention, it is even more complicated. We have, besides the 21 countries, we have also the European Union as a contracting party. European Union, by which some of the countries in the Mediterranean are also bound for MSP by the directive, while the other non-EU member states are not. So this is a really complex situation, but we are trying to deal with it, and we are trying to improve our management skills, including recently the maritime spatial planning. Now, the experience of transboundary cooperation or cross-border cooperation in the Mediterranean has a long history. I have put here an example, a very successful one actually, of cross-border cooperation between two countries, Albania and Montenegro, which have produced a joint management plan for the coastal region of Buna-Bojana River. And it was an integrative approach in all its dimensions, because the approach was to integrate water resources management and ICZM requirements, how to say, to plan from source to the sea, and coastal waters were also included in some aspects. It was also an attempt to combine the approaches and the objectives of several partner institutions, UN Environment Map, IOC, the UNESCO's water branch, then the Global Water Partnership for the Mediterranean, and also, to be even more complicated, it was really an experience of governance and management planning between two different countries. We have learned a lot from this experience of the Buna-Bojana River, although it was not a purely maritime spatial planning. Then recently, Barcelona Convention is introducing MSP in its work, and owing to the generous support of the European Union, we had a chance to experiment some pilot experiences on MSP within two projects, SinvestMed and Supreme. And these two maps show some attempts to have transboundary cross-border cooperation between two countries, Italy and France. And these examples were quite important, quite illuminating for us as well as regards cross-border cooperation. Now, how do we do with MSP in the Barcelona Convention? First of all, there are some policy and legal instruments that say we should do MSP as well. The first one is the Protocol on Integrated Coastal Zone Management, in which the MSP is not mentioned at all. But it is obvious that we have to deal with sea uses because of several provisions of the protocol, including the one that defines the geographical scope of the protocol. And seaward, the coastal zone, according to the protocol, extends to the external limit of the territorial water of the parties. So it is obvious that we have to start dealing with MSP as well. That's why we have worked hardly these last 2 or 3 years, on something that we call Common Regional Framework for ICZM, by which we officially introduce maritime spatial planning in the Barcelona Convention system. We hope that this document will be it was approved actually through a series of consultation meetings, but it will be officially adopted at the forthcoming COP of the Barcelona Convention, which will be held beginning of December, from 2 to 5 December in Naples in Italy. And by adopting this regional framework, then MSP will become an obligation for the parties as well, for all the parties of the Mediterranean, because the Barcelona Convention system works with a system of decisions. We don't have directives, we have decisions. So once the decision is taken, it becomes an obligation for the Mediterranean states. Then, waiting for this decision to be approved officially, we have worked a lot on methodological tools. The first one is the conceptual framework for MSP, which was adopted at the previous COP 2 years ago, and it shows how MSP should be done in the Mediterranean basin by the states. And also, we have prepared recently, in relation with the EU-SIRE, which is the Adriatic-Ionian strategy of the European Union, we have prepared those guidance documents for the Adriatic-Ionian cooperation towards MSP. In discussing with the parties, which are very sensitive for some issues, we came to the point to make distinction between transboundary and cross-border cooperation. Transboundary meaning for us that there will be cooperation among the states, general cooperation among the states in the Mediterranean, which are not necessarily neighboring countries. And there they see a big role of regional conventions in providing visions, in providing common goals, in providing guidance and tools and many other tools that can, many other things that can be shared by all the Mediterranean countries, whether they are EU member states or not. And then they want to make a distinction also for the cross-border MSP, which would be like MSP done by the neighboring countries, which does not necessarily has to be preparing a joint plan, but just aligning the MSP planning processes. So for the moment, we focus on the transboundary aspect, but still we as a center in charge of ICZM, we shall continue providing assistance to the parties for cross-border cooperation as well at their request, such as, for instance, a request of Italy and Albania to work together on a management plan for the Otranto area, which will be coming in the following years. So, what are the guiding principles of MSP for the Mediterranean when regards to the Barcelona Convention system? First of all, it is the ecosystem approach, obvious. I mean, it was mentioned in all in all workshops by everybody, and I think that it is really something that should be our priority, to try to use the ecosystem approach, and also to look at the good environmental status, to merge, to use, I mean really to merge the MSFD, or what we have in Barcelona, IMAP, Integrated Management and Assessment Program, and planning of sea uses. We have shown in our documents, in all our documents, this is the figure that shows how the Malawi principles are also merging with MSP principles. Then, notwithstanding that we need a pan-Mediterranean approach for MSP, we also have to look at sub-regional specificities. Sub-regional specificities because we have some regions of the Mediterranean that are quite specific ecosystems. So we have to also adapt our approach to these sub-regions. For instance, Adriatic is a very specific ecosystem for which we have provided already some guidance, and we have also identified some priority areas in which transboundary or cross-border cooperation, transboundary, let's say, should be established in the Mediterranean. And also this is one of the principles of MSP that we are advocating for. Do not try to do everything. Let's start with priorities, either priority areas, like those very sensitive ones, or start with priority sectors, like shipping or marine litter or environmental management, and some other priorities that can be defined by a specific sub-region. Then, of course, follow an adaptive approach. Adaptive in the sense that we should respect the trends, changing trends in different sectors, or adaptation to climate change, or adaptation to new data as well, or this is really important for the revision of the plans anyway, cyclic revision of the plans, so we should be really adaptive and flexible. And also, it is important to have a multi-scalar approach, multi-scalar in stakeholder involvement, in stakeholder dialogue, in trying to ensure the coherence of plans prepared at different geographical scales. This is also really important. And there we come to the question of the plan resolution as well. Not all the plans will have the same resolution, but they have to be coherent and comparable. So those are also very important principles. What are the key elements for, let's say, what we think could be a successful MSP? First of all, We have learned from our SupremeMed, SimWestMed experience that there will be no transboundary cooperation if there is no political will to get involved in transboundary and cross-border initiative. We have learned that, and this can be because of the border issues, because of some issues within the country, within the governance for MSP within the country that then makes transboundary cooperation difficult, or many other issues. Then also preparation in everything is really crucial. So in this, in MSP also we see it as a very important, this pre-planning phase, very important, in which a robust governance structure is established, where goals and visions are well defined. So this is really important to start with the planning process. Of course, agreement on data alignment, on data interoperability between countries, but also between different institutions within the countries is also really important, and also the willing to share data among different countries. Then we should try to focus in our, let's say, modest attempts to introduce MSP in the entire Mediterranean region with the priorities, with the activities having a highly transboundary nature, like protection of MPAs, or marine litter, or connectivity corridors, blue corridors. So these issues could be really triggers for transboundary cooperation. And also, it was clearly stated by all the countries that in this existing international institutions, whether it is UNEP-MAP or, for instance, Ramoge agreement between Italy, France, and Monaco, should play a very important role. What could be the biggest challenges for pan-Mediterranean MSP? First of all, is a lack of parity with regard to the ratification of international instruments. Not all the countries are EU member states. Not all the countries have ratified the ICZM protocol. So we have to work on this. Then legislation may be quite different among the states. Then there are, and this is something that was underlined in all our discussions with Mediterranean states, there are inequalities in terms of power, of finance, human and technical capacity between the parties. And last but not the least, yes, we have to overcome the language barriers, because within the Barcelona Convention system, we have 4 official languages: English, French, Arabic, and Spanish, not to mention all the other languages that are not official but are used by the parties. So that would be to start from my side.
Thank you very much, Selka.
Welcome.
And if there is any quick questions or comments, please raise your hand and I will give you the microphone. And there was few questions on Screenio that were addressed to you, Tilka. Let me just highlight them for you. Is Mediterranean Sea the first region in the EU to implement MSP project with transboundary consideration? And the second one was, how do maritime delimitation issues impact MSP in the Mediterranean Sea? Any reflections on those?
First, Camp 89, which countries was that? I cannot even remember. No, I mean, MSP projects were not implemented at that period. Camp projects were really coastal zone management projects, and they were not considering very much planning of sea uses. They were probably considering the impact of terrestrial activities on marine water, but real planning, no. No, I don't know who made this question. To which camp do you refer? Because
It might be outside of this room also, because
Oh,
we are on
okay,
web.
because we had a camp project. Those are coastal area management projects in practically all the Mediterranean countries, but two, Libya and Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I don't know to which, but there were no MSP focus camp projects till now. The first one will be the Otranto, the transboundary Otranto camp between Italy and Albania. And the second one, how do maritime delimitation issues see a conflict in terms of... yeah, I mean, first of all, not only a few Mediterranean countries have declared the EEZ, because in many cases, if countries declare it, it will be overlapping with another country's EEZ. So this is not an issue. We are not tackling that very sensitive issue for the moment, as we said, and we were clearly asked by the parties to deal only with the territorial waters, which is the competence of the ICZM protocol.
All right, thank
For
you.
the moment, I cannot say more about that.
Okay, but thank you once more. Let's give another round of applause for Tilka. Thank you for these ideas.